Alright, here we have to graph the equation y equals cosine of x minus pi over 4. Excuse my drawing of the pi symbol there. So we're going to deal with, there's only going to be one change here as well. We're just doing one at a time. The amplitude, let's identify that. That's the number in front of cosine. If there isn't one, it's a 1. Period. There's nothing in front of this x, so normal is 2 pi. Phase shift, here we have something going on. That's my h value. Okay? There's something right here. So here's what I'm going to show you. When the period is not changed at all, it's going to be the opposite of this h value, right? But only to show you something. So in case the period is changed, you're going to do the same thing every time to find the phase shift. So I'm going to set the stuff in the parentheses, x minus pi over 4. I'm going to set that equal to 0. And I'm going to solve for x, or if it's theta, to find my new phase shift. So in this case, it's pretty obvious. X equals pi over 4, which is moved to the right because it's positive. Okay? So that would be, I would stick with doing that each time. So in case the period does change, you're still going to set all of the stuff in the parentheses equal to 0 and solve for either theta or x. Okay? Vertical shift, there's nothing on the outside over here, so there is none. So the only difference here is the phase shift. So here's what we're going to do for that. We start at the phase shift. So instead of starting at 0, it is moved to the right, pi over 4, right? So instead of starting at 0, I'm going to move it at this starting spot is going to be called pi over 4 now, okay? Because it's moving to the right. That's why it's a positive phase shift. That means it's going to the right. So my normal period is 2 pi. So the distance between this needs to be 2 pi. So in order to find where I end my labels by taking the phase shift plus the period, because I want to have the total distance be the period length. So wherever I start plus this distance of 2 pi will give me my ending label, will give me the end of the cycle. Okay? So if I do that, I have my phase shift as pi over 4 plus 2 pi. Now let's just change this 2 pi into a fraction. So I'm going to say 8 pi over 4. Now we can add the fractions together to say 9 pi over 4 is the end of my cycle, and where I also end the labeling. So this will be 9 pi over 4. Okay? Because it's been shifted over. So normally you would end at 8 pi over 4 if you called it fractions. Okay? But everything has been moved to the right, this amount. It's been shifted to the right, pi over 4. So that's why we relabel both the start and the end. Okay? So the start is going to be your phase shift. The end labeling is going to be your phase shift plus the period length. Okay, so in this case it's 9 pi over 4. Now we need to find the intervals in half of this. So again, if you watched the previous video, we can average the values, the start and end values, to get that interval, because a lot of times that's what the hard part. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to draw that down here. So to find the intervals, I'm going to take the first thing, which was pi over 4, and we're going to leave the pi's out of it, so that's really like 1/4. Right? Plus the fraction, the end, which is 9/4. Oops. I took back what I just said. We're going to forget about the pi and deal with it later. So I'm going to add those together, which would be 10/4. Okay? So that's the whole thing. Then I'm going to divide this by 2. Okay? So that's really the bottom. If I'm dividing by 2, let me erase that and write it a different way. Dividing by 2 is really multiplying by a half. So that might help you a little bit more. So multiply straight across. So that's going to be 10/8, which I can simplify to 5/4. Okay? So that's going to be the middle value, just with a pi next to it. Okay? So this middle is 5 pi over 4. Okay? And we can do the same thing to get the next ones, but you might just be able to tell. This will be 7 pi over 4. And this will be 3 pi over 4. They all need to have the same distance between them. So in between each interval is a distance of 2 pi over 4. Okay, so you got to make sure it's the same consistency throughout each of the intervals. So this is because everything was shifted to the right, pi over 4. Now we have addressed the period, or the phase shift is taken care of, nothing else changed. So I'm going to draw my regular cosine graph. Alright, let me erase this part right here. So we know that the cycle is still 2 pi length there. So cosine normally starts up at positive 1, 0, down at negative 1, 0, up at positive 1, and I connect those. Make sure you're not making it a parabola, try to make it's a little curve on each part. And that would be the graph of cosine of x minus pi over 4. It's a shift, a phase shift to the right, pi over 4.